Today we are going to finish up the discussion of groups, and we will move into communication. These are both very important topics. Basically you should be reading the groups are chapters 9 and 10. Communication is chapter 11. You should be following through with the reading, and there's also a discussion board due tonight on the aircraft brake scandal. I think you'll find the case interesting. I think it compared to the FTX scandal of last year and the current trial, where if you follow the news, you know that Sam Bankman-Fried testified this past week and tried to defend, I think, the evident breaches of fiduciary duty, fraud, theft, whatever the litany of things that he's accused of, and likely, of course, we should always assume innocence until proven guilty, but I think the handwriting's on the wall, but we'll let the jury decide. But in any case, I think the aircraft brake scandal is kind of related. It's a great example of corporate wrongdoing, and it has a lot to do with, in a way, it's related to Disney, because it kind of talks about the organizational culture. I mean, it's more political, it's more the organizational politics, but politics like that occur in a culture, and I think you can't really understand why people do these things unless you understand them in the context of the kinds of social interactions that occur in small groups and large organizations. So, it's related to teams and groups as well. And I think also, I don't think that psychopathic behavior is usually independent of the context. I think a lot of the worst examples of psychopathic behavior occur in groups. I think last time I was talking about Le Bon's late 19th century, I think it was 1895 book, The Crowd. And it's very often that in groups, the worst abuses, crimes, etc., lynching, murder, etc., are committed. And I think the aircraft brake scandal, well, not to that extreme, it's still pretty bad, because they could have killed somebody. They didn't, but it was a close call. And I think that kind of behavior often emerges from group interactions and organizational contexts. So I think there's a lot of learning there, and we'll talk about it maybe next time more. So tonight we have a lot, because I didn't finish up groups last time, and I also want to talk about communication. So I'm going to forge into that. And we talked a little bit about social loafing, and that's the tendency for individuals to expend less effort when working collectively. Clearly, people who are highly conscientious and have a strong work ethic won't social loaf. That's almost tautological. In other words, it's almost the definition of it. But basically, groups that are good at defining the goals, establish some kind of competition between groups, have peer evaluation, select the members well, and base rewards on unique contributions, will be less susceptible to social loafing. That last one is highly controversial, basing rewards on unique contributions. Not everybody agrees in individual incentives. The great quality genius, W. Edwards Deming, argued strongly against individual incentives, for example. On the other hand, I think it's fairly obvious that in many contexts, individual incentives do work, but it could also be that they create instability. So you have to take your pick and be aware that any kind of reward has an upside and a downside. You might be, if you're using incentives, you might motivate people in the wrong way. And that's especially true with groups, because if you use individual incentives, it'll tend to minimize or reduce at least the incentive to work as a group. So if you're trying to create a team and you give people individual incentives, they're going to be motivated to try to outperform everybody else. Sometimes that's a good thing. I mean, in a baseball team, you would you would think that if each player is highly motivated, then the team will be highly motivated. But that movie Moneyball showed that if you put the right team together, it actually can outperform a group of 9 high performing individuals. That a group of second-rate people who fit together really well and complement each other actually can outperform a group of 9 top stars. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And I think the Japanese have that insight. They've always been very good at teamwork and small groups, and we can learn from them. Americans tend to be, of course, culturally much more individualistic than almost any other culture. And so we tend to put more weight on unique incentives. There's always something to think about anyway. All right, so groups vary as to their cohesion. When people spend time together, have a history, there'll be more group cohesion. Interdependent roles will increase cohesion. Cohesion is obviously going to create more teamwork. It just means sticking together. So I think I said this last time, that there are certain strengths and liabilities of group problem solving based on the article by Meyer from the 1960s. And Meyer pointed out that groups create more information, they increase diversity of views, they increase acceptance, and there are also serious liabilities of group decision making. One is that they take longer, like we saw this recently with the Republicans in Congress, who were trying to decide on a speaker, and they couldn't make up their mind. Finally, they arrived at a guy from Louisiana who wasn't all that well known, but they had to decide on somebody, but it took them a long time. So very often time is a real problem. Conformity pressure is the killer of really the real danger that groups won't perform optimally, that people always feel a lot of pressure to be like the people around them. There's a huge amount of conformity pressure in everyday life. And so that will tend to drive out the advantages of groups. Dominance of an individual is also, so in other words, the dominance of an individual means that there might be some people who have a strong need to be the leader or have a strong need for control. And sometimes one person quickly takes control of the group. Sometimes there might be competition, and this can result in competitions between different factions. Like I was saying, I think last time, that in the early history of the United States, there was a huge battle between Jefferson and Hamilton. And in the 19th century, Jefferson kind of won. In the longer run, Hamilton won. I think there's little question about that. But there was no there was a lot of hostility and a lot of tension, and it didn't really. I don't think they solved the competition between these two great minds and two great leaders, that they handled it particularly well, and it ended up that Hamilton was killed by Jefferson's vice president, who was not that closely aligned with Jefferson, but he was still in that camp. And they had a gunfight in Weehawken, New Jersey. So basically, we need to be aware that all groups have these traits that you try to counteract dominance by an individual. You try to train people not to be that type of leader. And if factions form, which they always do in groups of any size, there are often going to be factions, not always, but often. The founding fathers did not like the idea of political parties, but they quickly formed despite that. Despite that, the same people that were opposed to political parties within 20 years were actively involved in them. There was a period between 1800 and 1820 when there was just the Democratic Republicans, the Jefferson group beat the Hamilton group, and they pretty much had control of things for a long time, but that changed. So in any case, there are both assets of liabilities of group problem solving, and if we can train people to be good at group decision making, they will be more successful and come up with better ideas. The key to team problem solving is that they come up with better answers, that there's more ideas, and it's related to brainstorming. The decisions are more accurate as well, but they take more time. There's always conflicts within groups, and they encourage conformity. So those are some of the assets. Now, as a number of people wrote in the discussion board, group shift is a change between a group's decision and an individual decision that a member within the group would make. The shift can be toward risk or conservatism, but it's usually towards the greater extreme. So groups tend to generate somewhat more extreme views, and it's related to the idea of virtue signaling, which a colleague of mine said is largely the central characteristic of professors, that discussion leads to more extreme versions of the norm, of the group norms, as people try to signal that they're better than their colleagues. So groups have a tendency to err in the direction of too much risk taking, because and this is related also to Laban, who saw this same characteristic in crowds, that crowds tend to extreme behavior, but he wasn't talking about the kind of small groups you see in corporations, but rather large mass crowds. And this kind of extremism, coupled with the simple-mindedness characteristic of large groups of people, predictably, and I think in a way Laban anticipated the rise of both socialism and fascism in Europe, that these nostrums would gain hold and capture the imaginations of large number of people who saw them as the solutions to all their problems. So basically, a big way to improve group decision making is called brainstorming. And brainstorming just means that you get like 7 people and you sit in a circle and you set up a set of rules. No criticism. Do not criticize ideas. Criticism is an idea killer. So if you're around people who criticize your ideas, you have to free yourself from them. Critics are useless when it comes to creativity. Once the creative process is over and the finished work is in the public domain, then critics are entitled to have their day. They're allowed, obviously it's a freedom of speech and so on, but basically if you're in a small group trying to be creative, or if you yourself alone are trying to be creative, if you're around people who are negative in any way or criticize your ideas, you cannot share your ideas with them. I think I showed you that Sam Ovens video towards the beginning where he talked about things I wish I knew when I was 20. He made it when he was 29, so he was a little bit jaded by then. But basically, what he says is that entrepreneurs should never discuss their ideas with civilians. He uses the term civilians to mean non-entrepreneurs. That civilians will always have something negative to say. My wife, took huge risks in life. She left the communist bloc. She moved to Hamburg. She came to the United States. She took huge, huge risks. There was a time in her life when she was being followed around by the secret police of East Germany and so on. And every time she made a change. She always tells me every single person in her life told her not to do it, that any risk is always alien to civilians, if you will. So you have to be very careful. And so one of the rules of brainstorming is to never criticize an idea. And the other thing is you encourage wild ideas, crazy ideas, and you build on each other's ideas. So the idea is to come up with lots of ideas, nobody criticizes, and you play with the ideas and come up with more and more extraordinary ideas. And the idea is that very often ridiculous ideas that on paper seem absurd, if they're changed a little, they can be valuable. So there are a lot of examples like that. For example, a lot of you listen to the iPod or whatever it's called. You have like a tape recorder, a tape recording on your. Now they have them on the phones, but wherever, and you listen to music. That idea came from Sony originally, and the guy who came up with it was one of the co-founders of Sony, and his name was Akiba, I think. And when he came up with the idea for the Sony Walkman, it was called, and then of course it was replaced by Apple. But when he came up with the idea that people would walk around listening to recordings on a little device, people said you're insane because you don't use a tape recorder just to listen. You need to be able to record. And he said there's no use for the recorder. And of course, most smartphones have recorders, but people don't use them. I don't think I've ever used the one on mine. So basically, he came up with this bizarre idea, and people said it was stupid, but it became like one of the biggest products in human history. And there are a lot of examples of that where people come up with crazy sounding ideas, but then they change very slightly, and they're explosive. Another example is the guy who invented the microwave oven. His name was Spence, I think, or Spencer. And he got the idea when he was in the military for World War II, because he was handling radar signaling, and the radar signaling device would become extremely hot. And he said, God, this thing is so hot, you could cook food with it. And that's where he got the idea to use radiation to cook food. And, he told people they thought he was a mental case, that you would use radiation to cook food. But, then he went to work for Raytheon as an engineer, which is really a defense company. But he convinced them to do it anyway. And, the rest is history. It was like one of the, an important creative breakthrough in, appliances. So very often crazy ideas become good ideas, and that's one of the values of brainstorming. Now, you can build on brainstorming through something called the nominal group technique, which instead of verbalizing the creative ideas before discussion, people record ideas and each member presents an idea. No discussion takes place until all the ideas are presented, and then the group discusses and ranks the ideas. So the evaluation comes after everyone shared their ideas. Teams, there are different kinds of teams. Work groups interact to share information and help group members. Work groups, interact to share information and make decisions. but work teams generate positive energy through synergy. So teams are like more cohesive and have more of a purpose. There are many types of teams, such as problem solving, self-managed teams, cross-functional teams, and virtual teams. And there are also multi-team systems where two or more independent teams that share a superordinate goal get together. All right. So they're also important to teams are the context, processes, and states. So basically, the context is what level of resources does the team have, how much leadership, how much culture. The composition includes the abilities and personalities of members. Processes and states include what the purposes are, the motivations. Roles can include things like thinkers, shirkers, comedians, cooperators, dominators. Diversity in groups can lead to conflict, but also result in positive outcomes over time. Bigger groups become more awkward. So I think part of the Republicans' problem in that recent escapade was that there's just 200 people, so it's a big group and they have trouble. Jeff Bezos famously has a two-pizza rule that the group shouldn't be bigger than can eat two pizzas. Large size leads to social loafing, less cohesiveness, and I think also more conflict. All right, so basically, we can move now into communication, which is a very important topic as well. But before we do that, a couple of people were asking about attendance, and I will do that right now. So if you're here, please let me know, and I will give you credit. Mohammed Afzal, Nabia Ahmed, Rima Akhtar, Ali Omar, Omar Ali, I'm sorry, Omar Ali, Chastity Aquino,
I'm here.
hello, Nita Aslam, Nita, Natalie Ben Yosef,
Here, sorry.
okay, no problem. Ariana Besesser, Ariana, Alicia Brooks,
Here, Professor.
hello, Alicia, Anthony Castaneda, Jerica Cepeda, Alea Charlton, Soraya Chattery,
I'm here, Professor.
hello,
Hi, Professor.
Glory Christian, Crystal Clark,
Here, Professor.
hello, Elizabeth Desai,
Here, Professor.
hello, King Yang Ding, King Yan Ding,
Yes, here.
hello, Vladimir Duval Saint,
I'm here.
hello, Benvante Fogler, Jordan Williams, Jordan Glenn Williams, Dipu Hossein, Zinin Huang,
I'm here, Professor.
hello, Tanya Ingram, Prince Andy Isaac, Yi Lin, Karen,
I'm
sorry,
here.
okay, Lily, is it Lily? My eyes are going, okay, present. Lou, I'm sorry, Lou, my mistake. Eman Malik,
I'm
Yeah.
here, Professor.
hello. Joshua Mamie,
Present, Professor.
okay. Patrice McIntyre,
I'm here.
thank you. Alexandra Melendez,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Afra Noman,
I'm here.
hello.
Hi.
Deanna Pierre-Louis.
I'm
Deanna,
here.
hello. Miftahul Praga. Praga?
Hello, I'm here.
Hello, okay. Guoming Kwan,
Professor, I'm here.
okay, sir. Asif Rahman. Rafikar Rahman. Rafikar?
Yes, Professor, I'm here.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank
Safayat,
you.
you're welcome. Safayat,
Professor, did you mark me present? Anthony
no,
Castaneda?
no, I did not, but I will now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Charles. Charles.
Here.
Wan?
I'm
Charles,
here.
okay, gotcha. Robert Rubino. Mohammed Sarwar,
Here, I'm here.
hello, hello, Mohammed. Lauren Segal. Margarita Sherback,
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
hello. Hafsa Siddiqui,
I'm here.
hello. Giovanni Simon,
Here.
Chanel Sterling,
Here.
hello. Janitan Surawardi,
Here, Professor.
hello. Sanzita Tanya. Israel Platelpa,
I'm here, Professor.
hello, Israel. Makeda Tony,
Present.
okay, hello. Abigail Tuachi. Abigail. Ghazi Udin,
I'm here, Professor.
Ashley Vasquez,
I'm here, Professor.
hello, Ashley. Yoland,
Present, Professor.
hello, Yoland.
Hi, Professor.
Joyce Woozy,
Hi, Professor.
hello, Joyce.
Hi.
Haorong Jian,
Yes, I'm here.
hello.
Hi.
And last but not least, Xiao Hua Yan,
I'm here.
hello.
Hello.
Okay, so I'll just quickly call the names of the people not here, to make sure I didn't miss anyone. Mohammed Afzal, Nabia Ahmed, Rima Akhtar, Omar Ali, Nita Aslam, Ariana Besesser.
Professor, I'm
Joe-
here out in the restroom.
Okay, Ariana,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Aaliyah, Jerica Cepeda, Aaliyah Charlton, Glory Christian, Ben Vante Fogler, Jordan Glenn Williams, Dipu Hossein, Tanya Ingram, Prince Andy Isaac, Yi Lin, Asif Rahman, Safayat Rahman, Robert Rubino, Lauren Siegel, Sanzita Tanya, Abigail Tuachi. Okay, those are the absent people. All right, so just to recap, your discussion board on the aircraft brake scandal is due this evening, and for the rest of tonight, I'm gonna cover a bit about communication. I think your book touches on some important points on communication, and a lot of it's very descriptive, but and analytical. But I think they missed the main point about communication, which is that communication is very important for relationships. And business is all about relationships. So if you're going into business, you need to be good, not just at communicating accurately. Like I'm talking about my wife again tonight, like she's been working really hard to start an internet business. And she spends a lot of time on the LinkedIn, on the website, on the different, on photographs, on presentation. And it works really well. She's been getting a lot of followers, already getting phone calls and stuff. But the thing is, that's all about the accuracy of communication. And that's very important, but where it's even more important, and she's very good at this too, is developing relationships with people. And that's the thing that we all need to work on. Developing long-term relationships and using communication as the famous self-help author from the 1930s, I think it was, Dale Carnegie said, you need to win friends and influence people. He wrote a famous book of that title, which I highly recommend. And it basically talks about the importance of relationships and winning people over in business. And there's like Dale Carnegie Institute in New York. I just want to see what year that book was published. In New York, and you can take classes there. Now, there's also something that you should know about that we have at Brooklyn College that you could go to right at the college, which is called Toastmasters. And Toastmasters is a group that, 1936, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's still a very widely read book. I don't know how many copies have sold, but I'm sure it's in the many millions, 30 million I just saw. So, for a book, that's enormous. And basically, he talks about the importance of relationships. Toastmasters is a little different. Toastmasters focuses on your presentation, how good you are at talking, what I'm doing now. I have like a lot of people, I will also occasionally say, or, things like that. And they help you root that out and become better and better at your presentation style. And there's a group right here I just did it at the business school, the Complement School of Toastmasters. So you guys can join that and practice it. It's a very, very valuable skill to develop. And based on what you guys did when I had you give little talks about your career goals, a huge percentage of you guys chickened out and did it on the blog, on the Blackboard thing, on the discussion board. And you should not, that's bad. I shouldn't have allowed that, because I didn't think that many people would chicken out like that. But I know a lot of you guys are English second language and it's hard and you're learning and so on. But still, the more you practice, the more you advance. And the biggest fear that people have is public speaking. And that's where Toastmasters will help you break that, and you'll gradually become much more confident at it. So basically, communication is just the transfer and understanding of meaning. And there's always going to be blockages to communication. Just the other day, I was trying to drop something off at a guy's apartment in Kingston, New York. I live about 20 miles away, so I don't get there easily. But, when I'm there, I have to go there fairly often. So I told him I'd drop something off that I had to give him. And he said, oh, the buzzer doesn't work, so call. I called and no one answered, and then I rang the button. So I couldn't drop it off. And he said, oh, I was in the apartment. I didn't hear it. So this is the kind of thing that happens all the time. There's always going to be communication breakdowns. And in business, that can be disastrous because business involves a lot of communication, coordination, planning, leading. uh, all of these things involve communication. And so if their coordination breaks down, you don't get things done, things don't work well. So it's very, very important to have, to develop clear communication.
Do you believe that there's a need for restricting our personal tendencies to be emotionally invested in transferring ideas, communicating? I mean, I understand, in the selling point where, selling an idea, it's worth it to sound, incentivizing for engaging in the idea. But in the regular, all the other jobs, people have it easy just professionally keeping a standard, saying hi to vendors, saying, just representing the company and doing what you actually need to do rather than, contributing anything that is not pertinent to the matter at hand.
So you're saying, do you need to tailor your communication to the workplace? Is that your point, Josh?
Yeah, basically, you wouldn't need to, I guess, tailor your way of speech in the workplace, regardless of whether you're going to be held in consideration. You could just use normal speech patterns, just communicate according to an automatic, written script. I mean, they have that all pre-designed. I mean, it's important. Like right now, as I'm talking to you, I feel anxious. I feel like I can't really get across my ideas in the best way because I feel
Be
pressured.
patient with yourself. It's
And
often hard to explain something.
people would end
So
up.
don't be anxious. I think some of the time you need to be yourself, but you always have to be conscious of what kind of image you're presenting. Okay, so you always have to be aware and somewhat in control. If you lose control, it can be very costly in business. One of my favorite, I would be hard pressed to find it, but there was once about 20 years ago, Microsoft was being prosecuted I think they actually were prosecuted for antitrust violations. And there's a clip where the head of Sun Microsystems, which no longer exists, a guy named Scott Neely, I think it was, is testifying. He's like attacking Bill Gates, like really insulting him. And Gates is just sitting there with a smile. He's completely unfazed, complete poker face. And you could see in that clip just what a brilliant negotiator Gates is, and his ability to withstand this incredible pressure with total composure. That involves a great deal of control. And I think that's a very useful thing to have. But at other times, he wasn't like that. All right. So it wasn't, you need a mixture and you need judgment as to where to do what. I hope that answers your question.
And basically handling sensitivities.
You have to be aware of other people's sensitivities. You have to be aware of the image you're presenting. There are a lot of issues when you communicate. And you always have to ask yourself, how am I affecting the relationships I have with my coworkers?
Do you believe communication has ethical dilemmas?
Of course,
People could
always.
power their speech, sell something when it's really not the truth,
Yeah, telling the truth, misrepresentation, manipulating people emotionally. All these things are things you do in business. And there was a famous article I'll mention when we do negotiation by a guy named Albert Carr. You can look it up on the web. I'm sure it's available. I'll post it on this whiteboard. And the title, it appeared in the Harvard Business Review. Carr was a diplomat. He was like a government, I think he was a diplomat or some kind of government official. He wrote an article, "Is Business Bluffing Ethical?" And it's a truly classic article, and he basically says, of course, business bluffing is ethical. It's like saying, is bluffing in poker ethical? It's the whole thing. I mean, you can't, if you don't think business bluffing is ethical, then you shouldn't go into business because it's part of the game, and business is like a game. So you have to accept that. Now, of course, there are boundaries to that. What Sam Bankman-Fried did was not within bounds. So, of course, you need adult judgment about what's you can do and what you can't do. But if you say my cornflakes are crunchier than anyone else's, that's it may not be true, but it's perfectly okay to say that. It's called permissible puffery. That you're allowed to lie a little bit. So anyway, let someone else talk. Chanel.
Yes. So I'm kind of adding on or actually answering with Joshua's what he was saying. Probably not all fields would require you to have to learn how to speak certain ways. That may be true. So maybe you're in the business, but you work in the back end and you don't have to really speak with people. However, there's got to be a time where you kind of limit yourself with how you speak, because if you're in a position where you can get a promotion, and in where you get promotion, you have to speak to people, you have to be able to convince people, okay, what I'm doing is beneficial to you and you should join my company, or you should incorporate yourself with what I'm doing. You have to be able to speak fluently and to actually have some charisma with what you're saying, because you don't have to always be professional fully, but you're supposed to be able to, if someone else comes in the room that doesn't know you, that is full on business mode, you're supposed to be able to switch into that persona and to convince them of your business. And it's not always gonna be easy, but you have to know that, because it's a part of business. You're gonna have to speak with people. You're gonna have to encourage people of your business. The only way you can go on, to me, in life without learning to speak, to pitch something to somebody, is if your talent outshines, your talent that speaks for itself, and they don't even need to, they'll be like, I don't even care if this guy is dumb, if this guy is blind, because I know he can do his job. So you gotta have to learn it one way or the other. So
We should have reservations. Like, we shouldn't really be open so much about our lives, in the workplace. I mean, I understand we have to be comfortable around the people and engage in professional communication. And I mean, once you get promoted, I guess all you really have to prove is that you could do the job. I mean, the communication is huge in selling. They need people to talk with the right tone of voice, but
But you don't have to share anything about yourself, because guess what? Work is work, and you're selling what your ability. So you don't have to, like, I may be pitching something in a joke about something that I've never experienced before. So I may know that, okay, this is tied to Thailand, and Thailand is really cheap. So I may make a joke about visiting Thailand now. It may be cheap, but I've never visited Thailand before. So you don't have to share anything about yourself. You can find humor within society, or say anything within society to tie to them, or to just pitch what you're trying to say. You don't have to share anything about yourself, because that's work. And especially with this culture where with this new type where you start to share yourself, and then it can become an issue with HR. So you have to take it out of, it's not a conversation, it's more of you reading points of your business, points that you'd want somebody to know about the business, not about yourself. So you're not reading them yourself, but you're reading them what you're trying to portray to them, what you want them to be interested in. So if you're interested about wrestling, you're gonna tell them about all the best fighters, all the best tournaments that happen. I don't know what they call the things there. You gotta tell them everything that you would want them to know to get them interested. So that's all you're doing. You're pinpointing all the things that you want them to know that they would love it just as much as you.
Very good. Okay, so yeah, so I think you don't have to reveal too much personal stuff if you don't want, but you need to develop some kind of connections with your coworkers. And you need to be able to communicate professionally at a minimum. And even if you are very talented, I think you still need to be good at that. I think the more you're talented, the more people are going to attack you and try to sabotage you, and you actually have to maybe even be better at it if you're talented. I'm not so sure that if you're ambitious at all, that being talented is a way out. I don't think it is. So in any case, so basically what I'm leading up to is that a lot of the stuff that your book talks about is the technology of communication, different methods, how email differs from texting and so on. But what's really the big divide in communication is the interpersonal aspect and the technological aspect. So communication has become easier, and like look at us, where you didn't have to go to school. We can communicate without going to school, but at the same time, people have not necessarily gotten better at relationships, and that's the part that requires the most skill that you need to build. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to talk about your personal life or anything like that. You have to develop connections to the people around you, get them to trust you, and you trust them. So it's different from your personal life. So basically, but getting into this stuff your book talks about, the synchronous communication is what we're doing now, that both the sender and the receiver are present. This course is also asynchronous, which means that there are messages sent and received outside of physical presence. So things like voicemail, email, and discussion boards would all be asynchronous. So, this course is officially asynchronous. So I said a lot of us can do the synchronous, but if people want, they can do the asynchronous. So basically, both have seen huge advances, and what we're doing now, Zoom is one of them. Listening is a very important part of communication. Most of us are bad at listening and find it trouble to listen. I'm sure that there's a fair number of students who fall asleep during these Zoom sessions or walk away from the computer. I was once taking a student, and someone's mother said, "Oh, he's taking a shower," while I was teaching. So, it's often very hard to listen, but it's an important skill. So, it's something that we all need to work on. Conversation and face-to-face communication, so live communication, influence your memory, your transactive memory system, and are critical to developing effective communication. So you can't have strong relationships without some live meetings. All right, conversation can lead to emphasizing less important topics, but you tune into the audience better, you reframe information to suit the audience. So in other words, when you're in person with people, you adjust yourself to the people around you. Now, we were just talking about teamwork, and I said that that's part of conformity pressure, and both are the same. So in other words, doing that is good for communication, but it's not good for creativity. So there's often tension between creativity and communication. If you ever read the book, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, which I highly recommend, the main character in that book is a guy who's supposed to be very creative, but has terrible interpersonal skills. All right, and she's making a point with that. she's got she's got her own point of view. But basically what she's saying there, I'll put this on is that progress comes from creativity, and from rationality. But the simple truth is that to be successful in business, that's not enough. Ayn Rand was not a business person. She was a novelist or a writer. But basically, this idea that human progress comes from reason is probably true. I don't doubt that. But it's also true that if you're going to be successful in life, you have to be good at the things she's looking down on, which would be like interpersonal skills and developing relationships. Those things are extremely important. I used that book once or twice when I was teaching a course on seminar, and I was talking about success. And the character of Howard Rourke in that book, he's supposed to be a reflection of the great architect Frank Lloyd Wright. I don't know. Does anyone in the class know about Frank Lloyd Wright? Have you heard of him? Anyone? Any thoughts? So basically, Frank Lloyd Wright, I'll show you. One of his buildings. Well, there's one in New York. He only designed one that was in New York, the Guggenheim Museum. So if you look at my screen, I want to show you the outside, not the inside. Oh darn, here. It's not. Okay, so this is his house, Falling Water. He built it over a waterfall, and the waterfall merges into the house, and it's overlooking. He designed this about 80 years ago. It looks modern for now, but he designed stuff in 1900 that looks modern now. And the Guggenheim, you probably passed it on Fifth Avenue at some point. This is the only building he designed in New York. He was not a big New York person, but his motto is based on his mentor, Louis Sullivan: form follows function. And in the Guggenheim, when you see an art exhibit, it starts at the top and you wind around. So you wind down and you're looking at paintings going in these concentric circles. So anyway, that's Frank Lloyd Wright. So she was saying that this great genius speaks for itself. And that may be true. I mean, that's true in Ayn Rand world and in, the world of theory. But in the practical business world, even someone like that, if they're going to be successful, and Wright was not that successful. He didn't get that many commissions, and that's part of the story in The Fountainhead. That Rourke becomes really famous. He only gets a few commissions, but he becomes world famous because his designs are so amazing. And like his friend, who's a complete hack, becomes very wealthy, getting all the commissions. But whenever he has a problem he can't solve, he runs to Howard Rourke and ultimately exploits Howard Rourke, who, I don't want to tell you the whole book, but basically what Ayn Rand is saying is that we can't have human progress without reason, but success in the real world, and she acknowledges this. I mean, she doesn't make it a virtue the way I am, but she acknowledges it, that success in the real world requires that you get along with people and you have good interpersonal skills. So basically, we're mostly bad listeners and we experience burnout easily. And so we need to practice that. And I would say in my dealings in the business world, the people I saw who were most successful tended to be very good listeners. So they were exceptions. Successful people, I think, are good listeners. And basically, we need to be good at face-to-face communication. Those of you who are so tied to your texting and your cell phones and so other social media that you can't do face-to-face have to overcome that. That is not good. That is not a good habit. So basically, conversation, I sorry about that. So now one thing that you can practice with some friends is playing telephone. We can't do it here because of the, the way Zoom is set up, but basically if you get a group of students, let's say you have 20 students in a class, or in this class has 60, if I say something to one and they say, each one says it to some, by the time you get to numbers, well, really 57 now, by the time you get to number 57, the message is completely changed. So we don't always get accurate communication, even when it's face-to-face, and even less so when it's through means like telephones, cell phones, etc. So basically, one way to improve our listening skill is called active listening, which is where we actively engage and then respond to the person talking to us. So in other words, we acknowledge what they're saying. The best kind of active listening, you don't want to interrupt the person that's talking to you, and you don't want to change the subject or interject your own views, but rather reflect what they say. So reflective listening means that you acknowledge someone else's message and let them know you heard it. One of my great failings in life was that I was often late. There are a lot of people in this class who are often late. It is a very bad habit. Being on time is important to both those conducting the meeting and those participating. And, if your habit is to come late, and many students at Brooklyn do have that habit, I suggest you work on that. Email. 60% of employees spend more than 1 hour a day on email, and 22% spend as much as 2 hours. It adds to a sense of pressure, but it also adds to a sense of accomplishment to take care of your email. There's greater willingness to lie in email than in other face-to-face communication, and greater rudeness to people in email. Basically, your book has some advice. I think some of it was pretty good. Turn off notifications. Like when my cell phone dings, I have to figure out how to turn that off, because that's not a good thing. You don't want to be distracted. You don't want those little flags that pop up on your computer when you get a message. Like, turn all that stuff off. You don't want that. The social media should exist for you. You don't exist for it. So basically, turn off notifications, erase email you've read, which is a very big task. I've sometimes spent an hour doing that. Use search functionality when you need to find an email. Don't send unnecessary emails, and think before you send. Texting and IMs can lead to ongoing interruptions, which I think lead to a sense of a feeling of being scattered. And I think you need to turn that off when you're trying to focus on something. So you should feel comfortable not texting for much of the day. If you can't stop texting, if you can't stop referring to your smartphone, break the habit. Figure out a way to stop. It's really, it's not what you should be concentrating on. Employees should be cautious when texting and other kinds of electronic communication. Sometimes we lose our inhibitions and can say things that can make mistakes, and this in turn can be embarrassing. Remember, anything you put on email, anything you put on the internet is infinite. It can be reproduced an infinite number of times. So you have to be very careful with those media. Body language, so getting back to live communication, part of the reason that live communication is much more effective and richer means it contains more information, is that you can make use of body language, how your posture and your facial expressions. your sense, your other senses, even the sense of smell can be invoked at times. Vocal intonation, how we say something is often as important as what we say. Whether something is a joke or not can often be misconstrued if something is in writing rather than said verbally. I always got into a lot of trouble because I made a joke and people, he said, so basically you have to be really careful about that. So basically, if we're in close proximity to other people, we can better share values with them. And it's better if you're starting new companies or ventures that you're working face to face with people, that it's too distant if you're doing everything online. A class like this has less rapport, but unfortunately the students have trouble getting to class. So I'm not sure what the right answer is. What is the best communication for a given purpose, best method of communication for a given purpose? When things are very important, if you have conflicts, goals, emotional issues, important expectations, any kind of back and forth, receptivity, it has to be one, you need to do it in person. Anything really important should be done in person. Phone calls are almost as good if something can be done within 30 minutes. If there's extensive verbal explanation required, if you need to manage impressions, phone calls can be okay. They're clearly not as good as meetings because you don't have the body language and you don't have the contact. So now a lot of information can be conveyed by phone calls and Zoom sessions, but not quite as good as in person. Texts are appropriate when you have a quick thought, share a thought in process, a quick question, something brief. You need to set up a meeting. You can ask for an in-person meeting. If you need some collaboration in the short run, that's very short, then texts are good. Emails are appropriate if you have multiple connections, if there's something formal. So an email is sort of like a letter in the olden days when people use pen and paper. That if it's something formal, something that has to be accurate, official, that sort of thing. I just filled out my travel doc. I'm going to St. Kitts and Nevis in January, and I just filled out my official travel documents. So that was like done online, it's done in writing, of course. So basically, communication barriers need to be overcome. People often have information overload. Classes often have too much information. Students get, the will is there, but people just get exhausted from over information. People often have communication apprehension. I think Josh was kind of saying that they experience tension or anxiety in their communication with others. That's why, if you have that, Toastmasters is a perfect venue to work on that. It's a great supportive environment to get great practice. You make connections. It's a very good thing to do. Okay, so I kind of discussed the idea of channel richness, but just to repeat it, it's the amount of information that's communicated in a given communication episode. If more information is communicated, then the method is richer. So the least would be memos. The least would probably be texting. I didn't put that in the list, but the least would probably be texting. Then memos and email, voicemail a little more, telephone conversations more, Zoom and other, live, years ago they had video conferencing, that's now Zoom. And the most, of course, is in-person, face-to-face meetings. So, in The Godfather 2, I think it was when Michael Corleone wants to find out who shot at his house, he talks to Hyman Roth in person. And Hyman Roth denies it, but his body language and facial expressions clue Michael Corleone in that he was the one at fault. And that's like a great example, and of course fictional, but good business people are good at that. They're good at assessing things like that. So people like Warren Buffett, he says he doesn't need contracts. He can have a one-page contract because he'll decide whom he trusts and whom he doesn't trust. And he'll only do business with the ones he trusts. And he's right most of the time. So he saves a lot of money, not wasting money on contracts. So about 20 years ago, blogging became really big, and 15 years ago maybe, and that gave way to social media, video logging, podcasting. Everyone now, I get a lot of videos on what's that thing called? Patreon is one, and so social media is much more popular now. So basically, all of these are good methods of communication, but you have to understand the strengths and weaknesses and where they're useful. E-collaboration systems should be monitored to make sure that the communication is of good quality and that it's a good thing. It's working well. Do you use a smiley emoji in a business meeting? I would say no. Other people may view you as less competent, but if you use it with people it's okay. People, it's sort of people don't mind that, but not in a business setting. Okay, so you want to be very sober in a business setting, focused. You guys, you have to get away from the distractions, focus in a business setting. A huge percentage of the world population at this point use social media. About 45% of the people in the world use social media. And that's as of a couple of years ago, so it's probably more. And 68% of those use Facebook. So no wonder the stock does well. But basically, you have to remember, I was listening to, I think it was Fox Business, it was one of the business news channels, might have been another one, CNBC or something, and whatever it was, some guy came on and they asked him, well, do you recommend Facebook? And he says, I never heard this before in any business show. I've watched these shows for more than 20 years. And the guy says, I don't care how Facebook does financially. I would never invest in them because they're an unethical company. He said, Zuckerberg never cared about anything other than money, and they abuse the users. And, he started talking about that Netflix documentary. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. I use it in this class a couple of times, but I didn't use it this time. I'm retiring at the end of the semester, so I'm a little less ambitious than I used to be. So basically, if you read it, you look at that documentary, The Social Dilemma, I highly recommend it. It documents so many problems with not just Facebook, but all the social media. Users spend an average of 6 hours daily checking email and social media. So if you use social media, you're killing a lot of time. I would recommend not using it. I'm gonna be honest. I think you're better off without it on the whole, unless you're doing it for a business purpose. If you're using social media for a business purpose, then of course you're marketing or something, that's great. If you're just spending time twiddling your thumbs with, looking stuff up on social media, there's a lot more productive ways you can be using your time. I used to ask students, I didn't do that discussion board, I don't think this time, but I used to ask students, what's better, getting information from books or getting information from social media? And a lot of people would say social media, but that's completely wrong. Social media stinks as far as getting information. Because part of it is that you don't know who you're getting it from, and the messages are way too short to have any coherence. So if you read a good book, and I'm talking about nonfiction, I'm talking about like, romance books or something. I'm talking about like history books or science books or, books on economics. You're going to get far more challenging, more useful. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it, and maybe you would disagree with a lot of the thing. Just because I disagree with Karl Marx doesn't mean I don't read Karl Marx. You can read Karl Marx and not agree with it, but see what the mode of analysis is. There's a lot of stuff I disagree with, but I read about it. So basically, a huge percentage of people are spending a lot of time on social media. A lot of these have smartphones. I don't have to tell you, I'm sure pretty much everyone here has a smartphone. The smartphones are kind of paradoxical. If you look at that movie, The Social Dilemma, you see that smartphones give people a sense of freedom and autonomy, but they reduce your freedom and autonomy. So it's like they're enslaving you by making you think that you're more free. That's pretty scary. This goes back to Laban again and crowd psychology. These tech tools like amplify the dangers of crowd psychology and like enhance it and make people even more susceptible to the manipulation characteristic of crowd psychology. So anyway, smartphone use has been followed by decreased happiness among high schoolers since 2012. So in other words, if you look at that movie again, The Social Dilemma, Jonathan Haidt, whom I know slightly, was on there, and he says on there that he talks about the teenage suicide rate, especially among girls, from social media. It's terrible. It's like tripled or something. It's like much higher than it used to be. So basically, we have to be careful in our use of social media and be selective and ask. I think if you want to achieve things in life, you have to ask yourself, am I doing what matters, or am I wasting my time doing what doesn't matter? This idea your book talks about, I've noticed this for years, but I didn't know it was called technoference. Your book, I learned that from your book. Technoference is the ways in which technology interferes with rather than assists our lives. Technology should be our tool. It should increase productivity. It should make us more productive and richer. I don't think the smartphone technology has done that. So, you got to ask yourself, am I doing stuff that's making me more successful, or am I doing stuff that's like a drug, that's like an addiction, that's hurting me, and act accordingly? Your book points out that smartphones may retard emotional maturation. Late night smartphone use can cause individuals to be less engaged at the workplace. The shallowing hypothesis is that social media usage has led to less reflective and more rapid thought that can result in shallow evaluations. And that again, if all you're getting your information from is TikTok and Instagram, and you never read a book, you might think about that, because people who are knowledgeable get their knowledge from books. They do not get their knowledge from TikTok and Instagram. Okay, so if to you, like Instagram and TikTok are like a huge source of knowledge, you gotta wake up and smell the coffee. It's really not. You're not getting the information. You got to sit down and train yourself to focus. And I know it's hard because the technology is like, it affects you. it affects you. So basically, so social media can be constructive, but it can also negatively affect self-esteem. It can enhance shared cognition, networks, and team building. So I'm not saying it can't be used well and used properly, but it needs to be put in its place and used as a tool. You are not its tool; it is your tool. And you have to always remember that. Okay, this again, image management and the way companies are managing public relations is now increasingly embedded in social media as well as other kinds of advertising. So basically, I think if you're good at creating content for social media, that is a very valuable skill. I'm not saying that you actually are a user. In other words, you're a creator rather than a user. That's the way to be with social media. All right, so one other big issue, and then I'll let you go, is cross-cultural communication. The world is increasingly globalized. You know that, and I know that. Now, one of the, in my opinion, really bad things that Trump did was create this tariff thing, this tariff mindset. And there's increasing pressure for protectionism. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal on the weekend edition, which I get in print. And I was reading it this morning, and this guy, I didn't read the whole article, I was so disgusted, was saying, oh, economists say that free trade is good, but Trump is right. We should have 10% tariffs on all imports. And, this is, to me, ridiculous. If you're illiterate, if you're literate economically, this is an absurd idea, but especially for a developed country, maybe for like a startup country, like a country that's first getting into manufacturing, like, like Taiwan was 40 years ago or something, then tariffs might be useful to protect the infant industry. That Alexander Hamilton actually invented that idea that you protect the infant industry with tariffs. But if you're a developed economy, your firms have to be competitive. And if you have tariffs, they won't be competitive. And that's why Soviet industry never developed a competitive car. That's why France never developed a competitive car. They protect the industry, so they have these crummy cars that they buy in France and no one else wants them. The countries that now, one thing that contradicts what I'm saying is that Japan did have tariffs and they did have protectionism and they built Toyota. But the thing is, they built cars to compete in the American market. And basically, they started to build better cars than we did. But most of the time, tariffs don't lead to that. What tariffs do is lead to inferior products being forced on the people in the country. So you saw this in the Soviet bloc under socialism, that they made crappy products and they weren't allowed to have imports. And all the people there wanted blue jeans, towards the end. There's huge black markets. I've even met people who were like this Polish guy I knew who was importing huge blue jean, barrels of blue jeans and smuggling them into the Soviet Union, and making huge money importing blue jeans from these poor people who weren't allowed to import blue jeans. I don't think we need to go back to that. The economics of it is fairly straightforward, that a competitive economy is going to produce better value for the citizens. It's not better for the manufacturers. It's not better for the employees. A lot of people just see, well, if we have a 10% tariffs on cars, then more people buy American cars. So Ford will make more money, General Motors will make more money, they employ more people, and so those people will make more money. And so our tariffs are good. But the thing that omits is that all those people making money number about 200,000 or something, 300,000, whatever it is. Whereas everybody in the country pays a higher price for cars because of the tariffs, plus they get worse cars. So basically, 100,000 people or 200,000 people get jobs that they wouldn't have, the stockholders of Ford make some extra money, but 300 million people drive inferior cars and have to pay more for the cars. So the cost of that benefit is far greater. The cost is greater than the benefit, in other words. And that's true of tariffs across the board, that the benefit is visible, the cost is less visible, but the cost is greater than the benefit if you aggregate across everybody who's hurt by the tariff. And, sadly, despite all the attacks on Trump and the posturing in the media, the minute the Democrats got office, did they repeal the tariffs Trump implemented? No, they kept the tariffs. They had no problem with these idiot policies. They just didn't like Trump. So basically, the tariffs are still in place, and there's really no sign. Neither candidate, assuming Trump gets it, I don't know, but Trump or Biden, they're both for tariffs, and so basically the world economy is going to slow down. The tariffs are contributing to the inflation. Don't kid yourself. And I'll remind you of something if you didn't know, that the Great Depression in 1930 didn't just follow the stock market crash of 29, it also followed the imposition of tariffs, the biggest tariffs in the 20th century, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which went up in 1930 under Republican Herbert Hoover. So the Republicans were always the pro-tariff party until recently. Well, no, until probably the Roosevelt era. I don't hold me on that. I'm not a historian of that subject, but basically, I think it was until, if not from Bryan in the 1890s, it would have been from Roosevelt in the 1930s. And the Republicans were, before that, always the pro-tariff party. They were pro-business party, pro-manufacturing. They favored tariffs. And the Democrats were the pro-worker party. They opposed tariffs because tariffs raise prices to the people. But now, with all the special interest groups and everything, the both parties favor tariffs, and nobody's left that favors like what's good for the economy. So basically, globalization may be on the decline because of this push towards tariffs. But I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think a lot of what goes on in America has to do with global trade issues and our relationships to other countries. So it's very important to understand cross-cultural communication, how to negotiate cross-culturally. There are different, let's say, approaches to globalization. And unfortunately, when the Soviet Union fell in '89, and China, we opened China in the 1970s, and that relationship expanded in that period in the 80s and 90s, especially 90s, when all that took place. Instead of having like a free trade, like literally free balanced trade, they set up these global super agencies, which had been done in the post-World War II period, the Bretton Woods monetary agreement, the World Bank, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and what's now called the World Trade Organization, which back then was called GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It's now called the World Trade Organization. And these globalist organizations have managed trade to a much greater extent than would occur in a free trade environment. So we haven't really had free trade, it's been managed trade. And a lot of that has to do with the reserve currency status of the dollar and the imposition of currencies on the developing world by the colonial powers, like the franc in Africa, which has recently been under attack in Central Africa. So basically, it's good to learn these skills about globalization. I don't think it's going away. but I think what we're gonna have is like politically managed trade, and I don't think that's going away. I wish it would. But I sometimes listen to this guy named Tom Luongo, who's kind of crazy, but he makes some interesting points. He kind of says that colonialism never really died, and the British are still like figuring out ways to reinvent their colonial system. And I think there's truth to that. I mean, I spent time in the Caribbean, and it basically, there's truth to what he's saying. I don't think that's totally wrong, but basically, I don't think that's the kind of trade that is good. I think that's the kind of trade that is bad. I think the kind of trade, the free trade that you want, is where there's a fixed currency based on gold, let's say, and it's totally balanced. If one country exports more, then its currency falls. If it imports, I mean, if it exports more, then its currency rises. If it imports more, then its currency falls. And there's no control by anybody. It's all done through spontaneous forces. That to me is free trade. That's not what we have in the world by any means. And part of it is these blocks, like the European Union, the NAFTA, the ASEAN, and so on. But basically, just a little bit, I'm running out of time here. High context cultures rely on nonverbal and verbal cues, while low context cultures rely on word meaning. The USA, Australia, and Germany are low context, so that means that they focus on word meaning to a greater degree, whereas Japan, Kenya, and Saudi Arabia are high context cultures, which means that they emphasize verbal cues to a greater degree. So there's more subtlety in those cultures, less subtlety in the more Germanic cultures. Face-to-face communication is, of course, most important in high context cultures. So you have to ask yourself, am I dealing with a counterparty? Let's say you're doing business in Saudi Arabia. Am I dealing with a counterparty who is very sensitive to nuances? In that case, you don't want to use too much email. Go ahead, Josh. I see your hand up.
Do you believe, I mean, according to my understanding, governments precede, the free libertarian society of free trade, businesses and growth. And, as America being the first world country and with 83% of the rest of the world making less than $10 a day, I believe, if we separate from this government control and instead create a global economy, free ourselves from national identities, and somehow come to a peace with everyone, I think it would, do you think that's possible?
Yeah. So, I mean, it would require a lot though, because not everyone in the world understands like how liberalism works and how limited government economies will work. And I think they need to learn that. But I think if they get the right role models, they'll learn, because they'll see that's how you advance. So basically, yeah, I think if everyone in the world is able to advance, that's a good thing. Is that your point?
And also to release ourselves from national identity to get in the way of common mutual benefits.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. I agree with you. I was reading this book by Ludwig von Mises, Omnipotent Government, and he talks about the evolution of nationalism in the 19th century. It's very interesting. And it started out as a relatively neutral thing, that it was mostly like people that speak the same language should have a government because they have things in common. And it wasn't really a matter of pride, but he says that Germany transformed nationalism into militarism, and that basically they identified their national identity with military power. That was then transmuted in Eastern Europe into a much more kind of vindictive, beggar thy neighbor kind of mentality. So in
I
other
mean,
words,
I could,
nationalism went through various phases, and you know, I think the end result was that it wasn't good. It ended up being a bad thing. But in the beginning, it was liberal. In the beginning, it was like, well, just make it easier, have people who have something in common, have the same government, and then they can engage in economic transactions and, you know, an open economy. But it was later translated into more militaristic and then even, you know, racist kinds of doctrines.
I mean, I believe, it's not right. It's not right to take national identity as a permissibility to engage in warfare and take civilian lives, what's happening in the Middle East even now. And it's ridiculous. If I were a soldier, and fighting, I would, uh,
Yeah, well, it's sad. It's, you know, the world is a sad place. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't always live up to our hopes. What can I
make
say?
that
I
there's
don't have an
more
answer.
ability because of national identity. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah,
People
nationalism, yeah, it's had a very ugly history. There's no question. What the solution is, I'm not sure. I think exploitation is always a bad thing. Taking advantage of people who are weaker than you is a bad thing. And I think also undue emphasis on nationalism is a bad thing. I mean, you know, this has happened in the third world too. I mean, if you look at Rwanda, in the I guess it was the 1980s, it was all kind of terrible. These two tribes were killing each other, the Tutsi and the Hutu, and they wiped them out, you know. Yeah, go ahead, Natali, go ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like it's so scary. Now I feel like you have to like hide who you are as a person, and sometimes it's scary to even like walk on the street because you're scared someone's gonna like realize who you are. I just like hope things cool down and get better.
Yeah, you know, sometimes that's a reason for concern. Um, yeah, you're probably right. It's just how things are. I understand what you're saying. It's you know, I think people need to have a successful society. I mean, if you look at World War One, during World War One, there was a lot of anti-German hatred in America. You know, they were like doing bad stuff to people with German background, and you know, they could have been totally innocent. In World War Two, Roosevelt basically set up internment camps. You could call them concentration camps for the Japanese, and they were rooted from their homes and forced to live in these internment camps. And there was no evidence that there was any kind of disloyalty or anything. These were often people who had been here for 3 generations. Some of them were first generation, but it was a mixture. And you know, so there's often been these terrible situations, and you know, I think it's just stuff that we're seeing. You know, we're going to always see in the world. You know, I don't know what to say. I don't think nationalism has been a healthy thing, and I don't think even anti-colonialism can be. You know, I don't think that's always been a good thing either. Nor has colonialism. I don't think either of them have been a good thing. So, you know, I wish I had more positive to say about the world, but I don't. So, you know, I guess in a way I agree with you, but I don't know what to tell you. Go ahead. Who's talking? Patricia. Is it Patricia?
Hi, Patrice.
Patrice, sorry.
There was one point that was brought up in the documentary about how social media has become a way to spread misinformation. Um, a lot of they brought up the point of, because of misinformation being spread all over right now, that's part of the reason why tensions are so high in society, period.
Yeah,
Um, not only that, but like you brought up the fact of the Japanese internment camps that we set up here. well, I shouldn't say we, because I didn't do that. But the Japanese
Okay, fair
internment
enough.
camps were set up.
The US did.
Even though, yeah, the US did this. Even those who were born here were sent to these camps. Those who were not even Japanese were sent to these camps. It
Yeah,
just didn't
sure,
matter. It just was what
sure.
you look like.
That's right.
America has this thing about what you look like is who all of you are. You're guilty by association.
Yeah,
America also has this savior complex that they want to look good to other countries. They just gave Israel so much money to fight an ongoing war that's been going on for centuries now. It's over 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 land that, to be honest, for me, the earth is earth. There's no your land, my land. It's supposed to be our land. And we don't, and for us to be able to, like Joshua said, have some kind of nationalism or liberalism, I should say, liberalism society, we have to first understand to let go of, I guess, our ego to have to possess things. The
yeah.
US likes
Well,
to
it's
possess things.
hard. I mean, if you look
Yeah,
globally, there's very few countries that
yeah.
even begin
Human
to
nature,
take that
yeah,
point of view.
it's
It's sad,
it
but
is. It's
how it is, I know what to tell you. I've often wondered, like, is there any like, if you look what happened in Argentina recently, what's the inflation rate in Argentina? Does anyone know?
it's a daily rate that's increasing.
What?
I'm not sure. It's a rate that's continuously increasing daily. So
Yeah,
I'm not even sure what it is today.
it's a hundred
It
and
was,
38% inflation rate.
yeah, yeah,
And
the last time I
guy,
checked that, it wasn't that.
the guy that basically created the current round of inflation ran in a presidential election against the guy who wants to end the inflation. And the guy that created the inflation actually got more votes than the guy who wanted to end the inflation. So basically they voted for 138% inflation. Now they're gonna have a runoff election. Neither got a total majority, so we'll see. But they basically voted, more people voted for the inflation than against it.
But
So
you have to,
that alone tells you how insane people are.
yeah. But when you look at that and what happened with our own government and our own voting process, how sure are you that Argentinians actually voted for that and those weren't bought votes?
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, you know what? We're past the time and we'll end the discussion on that. I'm not gonna comment, but I understand your point. Very good, great points. And, all right, so if you have a question, of a personal nature, you can talk to me after class. We're past the deadline, past the, it's supposed to end at 9:40, we're at 9:50. But it was a great conversation. I appreciate Patrice and Josh and everyone else who commented. A really excellent discussion tonight, and let's keep that up. So I feel a little obligation to cover the material, but it's also really good to have these kinds of interactions. I think it's very important. All right, so does anyone have any questions or concerns? Don't forget your discussion board tonight is due at midnight. I'll give you a little extra time. And I'll see you next week, otherwise.
Thank you, Professor. Good night.
Have a good
Thank
one, everybody.
Good night, Professor.
Good night. Be well.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good night.
You too, Jonathan.
Good night, Professor. Have a good night.
You too.
Good night, Professor. Have a good one.
You too, Yolande.
Bye.
Anyone have any concerns they want to discuss? If not, I'll turn the recording off. Okay.
Yes, Professor. So I was here last week, but I did not receive the participation grade on for the last week.
What's your last name?
Last name Huang, Huang.
Say it again.
Huang. Huang.
Huang. Wang.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll give you credit.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Have a good night.
Good night. Is that it? Okay, have a good night, everybody. Any other questions before I go? You sure? Anyone? Okay, have a good one.